Welcome back, mashed potatoes. I've got another review of a Joeseph McCullough game from Osprey Publishing. I haven't had the chance to play this one yet, but I am very familiar with Joeseph McCullough's other works, and this uses a similar system, so I'll just give my thoughts on that. This is just a first impression. Now, I've got some footage here of me making a Barlgura demon for Dungeons & Dragons out of a flea market toy. That's what's happening in the background in case you wondered. Now, you may remember that I reviewed Stargrave, McCullough's sci-fi skirmish game, about 5 months ago, and I didn't love it. It was perfectly fine, but I thought it had some issues. So, how does Silver Bayonet stack up? Stick around and find out. Or don't, I don't really give a shit. Silver Bayonet is a gothic horror skirmish game set during the Napoleonic Wars. Those wars have unleashed a great supernatural threat which is feeding on the strife and death of a world in conflict. Players control a special unit of supernatural investigators trying to find a way to use these supernatural forces to gain an advantage for their chosen nation. It's nice to see that even in the face of a supernatural apocalypse, mankind still keeps its priorities on saving the werewolves and killing the French. Because this is a Joeseph McCullough game by Osprey Publishing, I'm going to review it in that context as these rules aren't that different from his other games. With that said, let's start with what I feel are real improvements from Stargrave, his last game. You might remember that I hit Stargrave for using a single d20 roll to determine the outcome of attacks and damage. It puts a lot of emphasis on the outcomes of those rolls and puts the strategy in the back seat a little bit. Silver Bayonet trades the single d20 roll for 2d10s. 2d10s, you get a bit more predictability in outcomes. Additionally, the critical hit and miss rules are optional now and muted even when implemented. The odds of rolling a double 1 or double 10s is much less than rolling 1 or 20 on a d20. In Silver Bayonet, the optional critical miss rules are even harsher, as they can disable your ranged weapon for the entire game, but the critical hit damage boost is only +2 instead of double damage. In my first game of Stargrave, my opponent took out one of my soldiers with their very first shot. They rolled a critical hit, and it did double max damage. Then they rolled 5 critical misses, which crippled their ability to do anything, and that was hard for anyone to enjoy. Silver Bayonet lets you opt out of the scenario completely or turns the volume down on it, so yeah, big thumbs up for that. A huge improvement with Silver Bayonet is that everyone in your unit can gain experience and level up, not just your unit leader. They can learn new abilities or stat increases. They can take lingering injuries or suffer from mental trauma. Giving your entire unit some character and not just the leaders makes the campaign more engaging. Again, this is a massive improvement over both Frostgrave and Stargrave. The weapons ranges aren't beholden to the Games Workshop standard. This might seem petty, but the super short ranges put forward in Games Workshop's universe don't make sense even in the context of their own fluff, and it drives me bonkers that every weapon 40,000 years in the future has the effective range of a paper football. 40k ranges were left over from Warhammer Fantasy, and the reason the handheld missile launcher shoots 24 inches is because it's the same range as this mud-covered peasant's pointy stick slingshot. And yet, so many other games emulate these ranges because Games Workshop leads the industry. But not here, baby! Here we finally get rifles that shoot 30 inches instead of 24. But you know what? I'll take it. I will take it. And besides that, it's not like the game is all long-range firefighting. The other ranges get very short very quickly, with pistols and blunderbusses only having a range of 8 inches, so there's still a balance of melee and ranged combat to be had. So there's a little bit more attention paid to balancing encounters between players with units that are different in power level. This wasn't a thing in the first edition of Frostgrave, and there's a little bit of an offset in Stargrave, and a bit more here in Silver Bayonet. This game is less token dependent than Stargrave. You may have to mark each miniature upon activation, when they need to reload, and for fatigue, and possibly for some other incidental things here and there, but it's nothing like the endless status effects that require tokens in Stargrave. Silver Bayonet introduces a new mechanic called the Fate Dice Pool. The Fate Dice are a pool of dice players can use for various rerolls or for other benefits. This adds another level of strategy, as the finite resources and deciding when to employ them can be crucial. In Frostgrave and Stargrave, collecting loot from the battlefield is a key part of every battle. That loot is then used between battles to buy even more or better equipment for your force. In Silver Bayonet, you collect clues instead of loot. Your force is, after all, a group of paranormal investigators funded by their respective governments. In Silver Bayonet, clues have an immediate impact on the battle as it's playing out. They can provide the soldier who found them with useful power-ups, or they can unleash a supernatural threat, which will need to be dealt with. You're not just picking up quarters off the street as bullets whiz overhead, you're pulling levers which can change the pace of the battle, and that's dynamic and a fun improvement. Another improvement is Silver Bayonet is that some units are harder to hurt than other units. Now granted, it's mostly just for monsters, but there are some playable units that are tougher than others. That wasn't present in Stargrave. Everyone was equally killable, and the only difference in defense was the armor value they had on, and that didn't vary much. As always with McCullough Osprey books, the rules are laid out very well, there's no trick to finding the info you need, and there isn't a lot of fluff. You mostly get rules, and the production is very nice. The art is solid, and the overall presentation of the book is quite good. Generally, I think Silver Bayonet is a marked improvement over Stargrave, but let's talk about what I feel are missed opportunities. For one, the premise doesn't live up to its promise. As always with Joeseph McCullough games, I wish there was a little more meat on the campaign system and advancement. How exactly your unit is collecting lore and artifacts to lead your nation to victory is pretty much left up to the players of the game to figure out, as there's no campaign victory conditions listed beyond whichever player levels up their group to level 25 first. That's because beyond experience point, there isn't anything for your unit to accumulate. And this is a big departure from his last two games. I understand eliminating wealth, as none of these groups are privateers. You can largely have the gear you want. But what about grimoires, tomes of ancient knowledge, blessed and cursed items, talismans, pieces of the original cross, etc.? Rare and magical items were present in the last two games, but they're strangely absent here, and this is especially confounding considering that the premise of the game is that your unit is collecting such things. Wouldn't it be better if all of these investigators were fighting to uncover the pages of a book they believe will allow them to control or bargain with the dark forces that are rising up around them? What if every 5 battles there's an extra clue that represents some of these pages? This would also allow for scenarios where one side may attempt to steal the pages from the other's encampment, or scenarios where the goal is to capture or rescue an officer. Instead, the scenarios for 2 or more players are all some version of you and your opponent coming upon a spooky place at the same time, and then spookum show up to complicate your battle. There is a guide for creating your own scenarios. I just wish that the pre-packaged scenarios gave you more of a sense of what was on the line tactically. I need more of why are these battles, not just what are these battles. Another thing that isn't spelled out in the premise is that most of these battles would probably have to take place in or around a specific location. Perhaps a haunted village in the middle of the Black Forest, for example. The reason Frostgrave tracks is because gangs competing for magic treasures in a single city are going to keep running into each other, especially if they're following the same clues or keeping track of one another. In Stargrave, the entire galaxy is the setting, and it kind of falls apart upon scrutiny. Silver Bayonet's setting is all of Europe, but with the fastest travel being horses and rail, it doesn't make sense that these units keep coming into the same haunted location at the same time, unless they're already near this location and working, the same area on the same clues. Especially if your campaign involves multiple nations, they just don't see how they would keep running into one another unless they were in the same place. And I'm not saying every campaign has to take place in the same setting, but multiple nations sending in special units to uncover the mystery of a haunted location makes for a more plausible campaign. Additionally, McCullough seems to want people to play with Napoleonic soldier miniatures in uniform, which also doesn't really work in the premise of the setting either. If these are small units of investigators, they may need to move behind enemy lines, into foreign territory, and small groups carrying important intelligence don't want to attract attention to themselves. They don't want to be caught or telegraph their movements. I'm pretty sure they would ditch the brightly colored, easily recognizable uniforms of the rank and file and dress as spies of the day did. If anyone asks, they're just a group of hunters. Magic items aside, I also kind of wish the game had a little bit more of the supernatural for the players to employ. Aside from mundane soldier types, there are only werebears, dhampirs, occultists, and champions of the faith, all of which are pretty low in the flashy power department. Frostgrave centers around wizards. Stargrave is full of psychic powers. Silver Bayonet is supposed to be about accumulating hidden knowledge and power, but you just don't get anything in that department to play with, and that feels like a real missed opportunity. Especially if you look at something like Dracula's America or Westwind's Vampire Wars, both of which let you play as all manner of monsters and take place within 100 years of Silver Bayonet. Silver Bayonet has set itself as the X-Files version of these games, where it's completely from the human perspective and the supernatural threats are unknowable. X-Files is good, but these sorts of games tend to be escapist power fantasies, and the only growth curve prepackaged into the rule sets takes your group of hardened soldiers and turns them into a group of slightly harder soldiers. In a supernatural setting where the world is at stake, that feels like a missed opportunity. One last little nitpick. there are a ton of different soldier types from which you can make up your unit of paranormal investigators. That's great. But some nations are restricted from taking certain units. Now, there's an optional rule for taking units from other nations, but they cost more and you can only take one. Now, some of these restrictions are historical. The Highlanders of Scotland should only be easily available to the English. They may take our werewolf muskets, but they'll never take our Dracula muskets! But why are sailors restricted? Even landlocked European nations produce sailors. Why are champions of the faith restricted to Spain and Russia? This might be some kind of commentary on the Enlightenment and how it impacted some nations compared to others, but even the most secular nations have individuals of great faith in them. Especially in a supernatural setting, I would think a demon attack would cause many individuals to embrace faith. If I ever do get a group together for a Silver Bayonet campaign, one of the first discussions will be about opening up the available classes somewhat. Now, these are relatively minor quibbles. I'm actually quite excited to give these rules a go. The meat of the game, the actual mechanics, seem to be McCullough's best efforts yet. I expect to have a lot of fun with this, and I'm glad it's in my collection. I plan to play it soon, and I'll give you an update when I do so. I'd also like to give a special thanks to J.J. McCullough for sending me this book and lighting a fire under me so I can finally make a new video. I guess it's going on 5 months. Sorry, guys. Inertia is a biatch. As always, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more of my stuff, please like and subscribe. If you want to see some pictures of my miniatures or just stay in touch, we've got a Facebook group. There's a Discord, but I'm not even linking to that anymore. It's fairly dead. If you'd like to help me support this channel and myself, I have a link to a GoFundMe campaign. It's for very specific medical condition, but I have many. If you want to know more about that, you can hit me up on the Facebook. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.